Hi everyone, my name is Jorge Sada, and the purpose of this video is to introduce viewers to my new book, Economics, the Social Order, and the Wrongful Revolution. The main theme of the book is to help show how when people are free to do whatever they want, as long as they don't harm anyone else or their property or cheat on their contracts, that the social order that emerges from so much individual economic freedom is far superior to what we get when the government taxes the private sector to create all kinds of public bureaucracies, like public education, social security for the elderly, welfare for the poor, and when the government regulates the economy and tries to do so many other things. Now, to most people, this seems like an obvious recipe for social chaos and great injustices, and I believe that most people reach these conclusions with good logical reasoning. We tend to look at society and think that only the government can handle certain kinds of problems. For example, we feel like we need the Food and Drug Administration to ensure the safety of our food and drugs. We feel like we need the American Medical Association to make sure that some crackpot can't just say he's a doctor and operate on people and can create all kinds of harm. And we want to make sure that they actually know what they're doing. And we also feel like by having the government force everyone into sharing, that we can make society a little nicer than it would otherwise be. We definitely do not want to see the children of the poor not be able to get an education, or the elderly who fall in hard times not be able to afford medical care or have a place to live. And we also feel like when we also look at our mainstream economics establishment and experts, they feel like we need the government to manage the economy, to regulate the economy, and that all of these bureaucracies really need a purpose. So when one puts all these three reasons together, and I'm sure people can think of many others, this provides a very powerful ideology that defends so much government in our lives and fears individual economic freedom. Now, the key to overcoming such fears is to understand economics. The world would be tremendously better off if we privatize as much as possible, but the only way we can see freedom as a recipe for prosperity as opposed to chaos is by having the right understanding of economics. Perhaps the biggest thing that gets in the way of understanding this important truth is that human beings have evolved in a much simpler tribal past where the social order was very simple and coordinated by easily identifiable individuals. But the modern social order is vastly more complex. It is not coordinated by easily identifiable individuals. It is coordinated by modern impersonal economic forces, by things like money, the banking and lending industry, interest rates, stock markets, the insurance industry. If tomorrow we decided to abandon the use of money, in a few years society will be plunged back into the Stone Age. And but these economic forces are very new to mankind. For millions of years, natural selection has shaped our intuition to sort of understand our tribal world where we dealt with people and we had to be brutal and we were always fighting and all kinds of stuff. But the modern economic forces, we have not evolved to intuitively understand them. We have a propensity to believe that it is individuals the ones that matter. And every 4 years we get all excited about whether Hillary or Obama or McCain or whoever is going to run the country, whether their leadership and their good qualities and their teams of experts are going to manage all of these bureaucracies and help make society better. But we are clueless to the fact that all of these bureaucracies, they trample on the economic forces that really bring about prosperity and social order. Now, another important difference between the tribal social order and the modern social order is that the tribal social order had a very small amount of wealth that was slowly replenished by nature. And having evolved in such an environment, natural selection shaped us to be violent, to be brutal. We always had to be fighting for this tiny amount of economic pie. Now, the modern social order is very different because thanks to these economic forces, the social order is constantly transforming cubic miles of natural resources into greater and greater quantities of human usable wealth. And this is something that reality easily verifies. Today we have nearly 7 billion human beings, and each person for the most part has access to much more wealth. So bottom line, it is important to keep in mind that we're tribal creatures interacting with economic forces that we do not really intuitively understand. If one just looks at humanity from high above, it clearly looks like a human ant farm, but then we have our political boundaries that represent an extension of our tribal territory. And we're Americans, they're Chinese, our heroes are better than their heroes, and this sort of patriotic tribalism has gotten humanity in all kinds of trouble. Now, next I want to discuss some of the chapters in the book. The introductory chapter just discusses some of the things I've mentioned here in more detail, and it also tries to open up the viewer's mind to this idea that society can quickly change, that we can change the way we look at things very quickly. If one looks at the history of mankind, we have seen major ideological shifts in a short amount of time. For example, just a few generations ago, the idea that a man and a woman had the same rights would have seemed absurd, and the same thing applies to something like slavery. And when it comes to economics, in the 20th century, we saw millions of human beings that had good intentions and were very smart fall for communist ideology and inadvertently bring disaster upon themselves. So one has to be open to the idea that we are biologically no different than those people, and we too can be following wrong ideas, that in the future superior ideas will make our current ideas seem like a disaster, just like we look back at slavery and unequal treatment of men and women as being something that is absurd. So hopefully someday soon, I am one of the many libertarians and people who are realizing that we are in the middle of this economic revolution, where these simple economic concepts that show how individual freedom is the key to prosperity as opposed to chaos can quickly spread through the minds of millions and really bring about an intellectual revolution. So then the chapter on economics explains economics. I try to show economics in a sort of two-dimensional way, where one can see the social order sort of build right before your eyes, and I pay special attention to the role that knowledge plays in society. I also discuss the importance of things like the interest rate, and how when our central bank starts messing around with the interest rate, it creates the booms and busts in the economy. This is referred to as the Austrian theory of the business cycle that Dr. Paul is constantly bringing up. Then I have a small chapter on the environmentalist movement, because the environmentalist movement, its anti-economic growth policies are a disaster. And we have to understand that the key to the environment is to have respect for private property. We need capitalism. We need individual economic freedom to let our technology be what really takes care of the environment. And then there's a chapter on the evolution of culture that looks at the evolution of things like morals, laws, religion, and how they are shaped by economic forces and how they interact with economic forces. This is a very important chapter that is really needed to understand much of how the world works. It is a chapter that I wasn't sure if I really wanted to include, because I know a lot of Ron Paul supporters and libertarians are very pious Christians, and I feel like this chapter wasn't going to be, in their alley, because it is based on an evolutionary understanding of the world. But this chapter does not really attack religion. In many ways, it praises and it defends the traditional Christian values that have helped fight for individual economic freedom, to keep things local, to have personal responsibility, to have individuals and their families and their communities be the ones that solve problems, as opposed to have the government be the one that manages society, which pushes us in the road towards socialism and communism. This chapter on cultural evolution is largely based on the ideas of 1974 Nobel laureate in economics Friedrich Hayek. Then the last chapter is titled The Ron Paul Revolution, and it's really just a juggernaut of various subjects like the non-interventionist foreign policy, how we should bring our troops home, how our presence in the Middle East is what's causing all kinds of problems. It looks at the disastrous effect of our military spending, how that is destroying our own economy from within. And I also discuss a little bit the character of the Ron Paul Revolution and this libertarian revolution in general. I mean, we're not really fighting a battle of good versus evil. We're just fighting a battle against our own inherent tribalism and economic ignorance, for which no one is really to blame. Our politicians and government is not evil. It is an outgrowth of our economic ignorance. Politicians really have no clue what it is that they're doing. Without an understanding of economics, we inevitably believe that we need all of these bureaucracies to manage the social order. So understanding economics is key. Putting $20 million telling people about freedom and the Constitution, to most people that just seems like a recipe for chaos. Again, it is economics that ties freedom to prosperity. Now, the days of defending individual freedom based on moral arguments, unfortunately, are getting a little behind us. Most people do not care about those arguments. They care about what they think is going to make their life better. They have no problem of voting for socialized medicine, knowing that somebody's going to go to jail if they do not choose to fund it. And lastly, I would like to add that you can visit youtube.com/capitalistworld, where you can find a 1-hour introduction to economics based on the way I explain things in the book, as well as videos on related content.